My boss embarrassed me in front of the entire company during our biggest product launch. He thought I'd stay quiet, but he had no idea what was coming next. Stay with me while I walk you through what happened, because this one still feels unreal. My name is Christina, and I'm a marketing manager in my late 20s. For months, I had been living and breathing a single project, a product launch that was supposed to be my career highlight. I spent countless late nights fine-tuning presentations, coordinating with designers, and even stepping into roles outside my department just to make sure nothing went wrong. Everyone knew how hard I was working, but I didn't mind. This was my chance to shine. Richard, our CEO, had always been a larger-than-life figure in the office. He was smart, no doubt, but also arrogant and dismissive of anyone he thought was beneath him. I used to look up to him. I even considered him a mentor once. But over time, I began to notice how he'd brush aside ideas if they didn't come from him, and then later repackage them as his own. Still, I told myself it was part of the job, that maybe that's just how corporate life worked. The day of the launch, I stood backstage with my team, heart racing with both nerves and excitement. Everything was ready. The displays, the screens, the demo, the press kit. It was the biggest audience we'd ever had: clients, investors, partners, even media. When Richard walked onto the stage, I clapped with everyone else. This was supposed to be our victory moment. But then, as he began his speech, my stomach dropped. He wasn't just introducing the product. He was taking credit for everything I had done. Every campaign detail, every creative decision, every late-night solution I had fought for. He presented them as if they were his brilliant ideas. And when he finally mentioned me, it was only to make a joke at my expense, calling me his assistant, who helped with the little stuff. The crowd laughed awkwardly. My cheeks burned. I glanced around the room, and I could see my colleagues' pity in their eyes. Some shifted uncomfortably, others avoided looking at me altogether. I wanted to scream, to call him out right there, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing control in that moment would only give him more power. Inside, though, I was crumbling. Months of my life had just been erased in seconds, stolen by the very person I trusted to recognize my work. I smiled stiffly through the rest of the event, clapping when expected, posing for photos, even though my chest felt tight with betrayal. That night, when I got home, I sat in the dark and replayed every word he said. The humiliation, the smirk on his face, the laughter of the audience. It burned inside me. For years, I had given this company everything. For years, I had been loyal. And this was my reward. I knew then something had changed in me. This time, I wouldn't let it slide. I stood there with a frozen smile on my face, my hands clasped tightly in front of me, nails digging into my skin so no one would see them tremble. Richard's words rang in my ears like a cruel echo. He had mocked me again, right after the presentation, in that patronizing tone he always used when he wanted to remind me of my place. He told a client that I was still learning the ropes, as if I hadn't been the one holding the ropes together all these years. People chuckled politely, but I could see the looks they gave me, the kind of pity that feels sharper than mockery. Not one person spoke up. Not a single colleague defended me. I kept my head high, pretending it didn't bother me, but inside, every word cut deep. It wasn't the first time Richard had done this, but something about the public nature of it, the laughter, the way he smirked like he owned me, made it unbearable. I swallowed my anger like poison, keeping my voice calm, nodding at clients, answering questions, smiling for photos. I refused to let him see me crack. But when I finally got home, the mask shattered. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, my chest tight, tears stinging my eyes. All the years came flooding back. The nights I had stayed in the office until midnight, eating cold takeout while Richard's lights were off hours ago. The weekends I canceled plans with friends just to finish campaigns that made the company million. The vacations I never took because Richard said I was too valuable to be away. And every single time he promised, "I'll make sure your efforts don't go unnoticed." But they always did. Or worse, they were noticed, just not credited to me. I remembered the first time I caught him presenting my strategy as his own. I had been shocked, but he brushed it off later, saying, "We're a team, Christina. Your success is my success." Back then, I believed him. I thought maybe he was protecting me, that my time for recognition would come. Now I saw it clearly. He had never been a mentor. He had been using me from the very start, pulling everything he could from my ideas while keeping me in the shadows. That betrayal cut deeper than the humiliation. I had trusted him. I had admired him. I had been loyal. I wiped my tears and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked tired, broken, but behind the red eyes was something else. A spark I hadn't felt before. Anger, yes, but also resolve. Richard thought he had crushed me tonight, that I would just keep nodding and working like always. But he was wrong. For the first time in years, I whispered to myself, "Enough." I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while the city lights flickered through my window. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Richard's voice, that smug tone, that laugh at my expense. My chest tightened with anger, but beneath it was something worse, shame. Not just shame at what he did, but shame that I had let it happen for so long. The truth hit me like a wave. This wasn't the first time he had stolen from me. I thought back to my very first year with the company, when I created a social media campaign that went viral and boosted our sales like never before. Richard had patted me on the back, told me it was great work, then stood in front of the board and called it his vision. I had sat there, clapping with everyone else, my heart pounding, hoping maybe he'd mention my name. He didn't. And I told myself, next time he'll recognize me. But there was no next time. It happened again when I designed a loyalty program that doubled customer retention. Richard strutted into a meeting with investors and laid out the plan as if he'd written it himself. Millions poured into the company, and all I got was a vague thank you and more overtime. Over the years, I had dozens of these wins, and every single one had been swallowed by his ego. The realization made me sick. I had been complicit in my own erasure. Every time I stayed silent, every time I convinced myself it wasn't worth the fight, I gave him permission to keep doing it. I had been so desperate to protect my job, to not make waves, that I had allowed him to build his empire on my back. Lying there in the dark, I felt something inside me shift. I whispered to myself, no more. This time was different. This time he had humiliated me in front of everyone. He hadn't just stolen my work, he had tried to destroy my dignity. And I wasn't going to let him walk away with that. But revenge. I didn't want to get dirty the way he did. I didn't want to scream or throw accusations without proof. That would make me look weak, emotional, unstable. Exactly what he wanted people to believe about me. If I was going to fight back, it had to be smart. It had to be quiet. It had to be undeniable. So I began to think. Slowly at first, then faster, ideas coming like sparks in the dark. What did I know that Richard didn't realize I knew? What weaknesses had he shown over the years? I started to piece together possibilities, small threads that, if pulled, might unravel everything he had built. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift, even if only in my mind. I wasn't the powerless employee anymore. I had something far more dangerous, knowledge. And I intended to use it. The next morning, I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen while the office buzzed around me. On the outside, I looked calm, typing away, nodding at colleagues who passed by. But inside, my mind was racing. I kept replaying every moment I had worked under Richard, every detail he had let slip, every careless decision he had made. For years, I had brushed them aside, thinking it wasn't my place to question him. But now I saw them differently. They weren't just mistakes. They were cracks I could finally use. Richard had always been arrogant, so confident that no one would dare challenge him. That arrogance made him sloppy. I remembered times when he left confidential documents on the printer, expecting no one to question them. I remembered being in meetings where he bragged about creative accounting to cover up overspending, laughing like it was a harmless joke. But the biggest memory came from the product launch plan. Weeks before the event, I had seen numbers that didn't add up. Budgets were shifted in strange ways, funds moved into categories that made no sense. When I quietly asked about it, he waved me off, saying, "Don't worry about the details. Focus on the marketing. That's what you're good at." At the time, I had let it go. He was the CEO. I was just an employee. But now, those numbers lit up in my mind like flashing signs. Shady backroom deals, misused funds. Richard wasn't just arrogant. He was reckless. And worse, he had trusted me too much. He thought I was harmless, someone who would never notice, never question, never act. I realized then that he had given me access to almost everything without a second thought. I was often the one who prepared his reports, polished his presentations, organized his files. He wanted the work done, but he didn't want to do it himself. And that meant I had seen more than he realized. That afternoon, when no one was around, I opened some of the old financial folders I still had access to. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked through them, my heart pounding in my chest. And there it was, proof of the shady dealings I had suspected. Funds misdirected into shell accounts, payments made to vendors that didn't exist, numbers adjusted to paint a prettier picture for investors. He had been stealing from the very company he pretended to be the savior of. I closed the files quickly, my pulse racing. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was evidence. The kind of evidence that could destroy him if it came to light. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow breath, forcing myself to appear normal. Around me, the office moved on like it was any other day. No one knew that I had just discovered the weapon that could change everything. From that moment, I decided I would gather everything, carefully, quietly, and Richard would never see it coming. I walked into the office the next day with a steady smile, my heels clicking against the polished floor. To anyone watching, I looked the same as always, calm, professional, focused on my work. Inside, though, every step I took was calculated. I couldn't let anyone suspect what I was really doing. Richard greeted me in his usual way, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Christina, grab me a coffee, will you? And don't forget to update the slides for tomorrow. Try not to mess it up this time." His tone was casual, dismissive, the way someone might speak to an intern rather than a manager. I nodded politely, hiding the sharp sting of his words. It wasn't worth showing emotion. Not yet. Throughout the day, he found little ways to humiliate me. During a team meeting, when I offered a suggestion, he chuckled and said, "Let's leave the big ideas to the people with experience, Christina." The room went silent. I noticed a few of my colleagues glance at me with pity, while others looked away, uncomfortable. Later, I overheard whispers in the break room. Some said it wasn't fair, that I deserved better. Others speculated I must have done something to upset him. Gossip spread fast in our office, and Richard knew it. He thrived on keeping me small, but I didn't break. Instead, I smiled, nodded, and carried on with my work. What Richard didn't know was that every fake smile I gave him bought me more time to gather what I needed. Every condescending remark only sharpened my resolve. In between tasks, I quietly continued my investigation. I moved files onto secure drives, cross-checked numbers, and organized the evidence so it would be undeniable when the time came. I was meticulous, careful not to leave a trace. Richard thought he was winning. In reality, I was building the case that would end him. The timing had to be perfect. I couldn't just expose him in a hallway or in front of the staff. No, I wanted the impact to be unforgettable. That's when I remembered the upcoming shareholders' meeting. Richard had been bragging about it for weeks, calling it his moment to shine. He planned to pitch an expansion strategy, one he claimed would secure the company's future and cement his legacy. He was so sure it would be his triumph. But for me, it was the stage I had been waiting for, the perfect place to pull back the curtain and reveal who he really was. The shareholders trusted him blindly, but they trusted numbers even more. And I had the numbers that told the real story. As I left the office that evening, Richard's voice echoed behind me, laughing with a client over the phone. He had no idea what was coming. The storm was building, and I was the one holding the lightning. Late one evening, when most of the office had cleared out and only the soft hum of the cleaning crew lingered in the halls, I sat at my desk with my heart pounding. My screen glowed with spreadsheets and financial reports Richard had carelessly left under my access. I had gone through dozens of files before, but tonight, something caught my eye. The budget tied directly to the product launch. The very event he had humiliated me at didn't add up. At first, I thought it might be a mistake, but the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Funds were missing, shifted into vague categories like external consulting and miscellaneous services. The numbers weren't just sloppy, they were deliberate. Richard had siphoned money meant for the launch into accounts that didn't belong to the company. My hands trembled as I clicked through each folder, cross-referencing invoices with the actual expenses I had managed myself. The evidence was undeniable. He had misappropriated a massive amount of money, and he had counted on no one noticing. After all, who would dare question the CEO? But I wasn't done. The more I looked, the more I uncovered. Reports he had presented to the board in past quarters were doctored. Numbers inflated to make the company look stronger than it really was. He had hidden losses, shifted expenses, and twisted facts until they painted the picture he wanted. On paper, he was a genius leader. In reality, he was a fraud. I leaned back in my chair, my chest tightening with a mix of fear and excitement. This was it, the smoking gun. The kind of proof that could ruin him, not just embarrass him. But with that realization came the weight of what I was holding. If I used this, it wouldn't just be Richard's downfall. It could shake the entire company. It could cost me my career if I misstepped. I forced myself to slow down. Emotions wouldn't protect me here, only facts. I printed copies of the key documents and scanned them onto an encrypted drive I kept hidden at home. I checked and rechecked everything, making sure there were no holes, no chance for him to wriggle out. Every number lined up, every inconsistency circled in red. The more I confirmed it, the steadier my resolve grew. Still, fear crept in. I imagined Richard finding out what I was doing, his voice sharp and cruel, his power crushing me before I even had the chance to speak. But then I remembered the humiliation, the laughter at my expense, the years he had stolen from me. And beneath the fear came something stronger, a thrill I couldn't deny. For once, the power wasn't in his hands. It was in mine. I closed the files, shut down the computer, and gathered my things. The evidence was safe, waiting for the right moment. As I walked out of the dark office, my footsteps echoed louder than usual. For the first time, I didn't feel like Richard's victim. I felt like his reckoning. Each day at the office became a test of patience. I wore the same mask of loyalty, the same polite smile, the same quiet obedience Richard expected from me. To him, I looked like the same Christina he had always controlled. But underneath, I was a storm waiting to break. Every morning when I walked past his glass office, I reminded myself, Soon, Richard was more arrogant than ever. With the shareholders' meeting approaching, he strutted through the halls like a king preparing for his coronation. He boasted loudly about his vision for the company, about the groundbreaking expansion strategy he was about to unveil. Whenever he spoke, he made sure to remind everyone that he alone had built the company's success, conveniently erasing the dozens of people who had actually carried the weight of his ideas, especially me. In meetings, he continued his routine of sidelining. I would offer a thoughtful suggestion, only for him to cut me off with a smirk. Let's not get lost in the weeds, Christina. Leave the big picture thinking to leadership. Laughter would ripple around the room, forced and uncomfortable, but no one dared challenge him. I swallowed the humiliation each time, but inside I was calm. Let him think I was powerless. Let him believe he still owned the room. The more he underestimated me, the sweeter the final strike would be. Still, the pressure weighed heavily on me. I knew what I had discovered was real, but doubt gnawed at me. What if I had misinterpreted something? What if Richard spun it around and made me look like a fool? I needed someone to confirm I wasn't imagining. That's when I decided to approach Michael. Michael had been with the company for decades. He worked in finance, quiet and steady, the kind of man who spoke only when he had something worth saying. He had always treated me with respect, even when others brushed me off. One evening, when the office was almost empty, I knocked on his door. He looked up from his paperwork, his eyes kind but sharp. "I need to show you something," I said, my voice low. My hands trembled as I passed him the copies I had made. For a long time, he flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed. The silence felt endless. Then he set the papers down and looked at me with something I hadn't expected, pride. "You're not wrong, Christina," he said softly. "These numbers don't lie. Richard's been playing dirty for a long time. If you bring this forward, it will stick." Relief washed over me so strong, I almost collapsed into the chair across from him. For weeks, I had carried the burden alone, afraid of being wrong. Hearing Michael confirm it gave me strength I hadn't realized I needed. Walking home that night, the city lights seemed brighter, the air sharper. Richard thought I was still his loyal employee. He thought I was invisible, but I wasn't invisible anymore. I was ready. The morning of the shareholders' meeting felt heavier than any storm Christina had ever faced. She woke early, her body buzzing with nervous energy, yet beneath the trembling in her hands was an unshakable sense of resolve. Today wasn't just another meeting. Today was the day she reclaimed her dignity. At the office, Richard strutted through the glass doors like a king arriving at court. His designer suit, his smug grin, his booming voice. Every step dripped arrogance. "Today's the day, Christina," he sneered as they passed in the lobby. "Try not to trip over your own spreadsheets when the big boys are talking numbers." Christina forced a polite smile, clutching her bag close. Inside were neatly organized files, the copies of bank transfers, internal reports, and falsified numbers Richard thought no one would ever catch. She had rehearsed this moment endlessly, whispering her lines in the mirror, steadying her voice until even she believed she could pull it off. Still, her heart thudded as if trying to break out of her chest. The boardroom buzzed with anticipation. Shareholders filled the long mahogany table, some tapping on tablets, others adjusting their glasses as they prepared for Richard's grand presentation. He loved these performances, striding up front like a showman, feeding them inflated numbers that made him look like a genius. Michael, seated across the table, caught Christina's eye. He gave the smallest nod, a silent reminder she wasn't alone. Her chest loosened just a little. Richard launched into his speech, waving glossy charts across the screen. "As you can see," he boomed, "our product launch has exceeded expectations. Profits are climbing. Our growth trajectory is unmatched in the market." His voice filled the room with practiced confidence, each word dripping with self-congratulation. Christina sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, her bag resting by her feet. Every slide he clicked through was another lie she now had proof against. Her palms dampened, her throat tightened, but she kept breathing, in and out, rehearsing the words she'd soon speak. Then Richard made his fatal move. He highlighted a chart of projected revenue, numbers she knew were fabricated, the same numbers she had verified and traced back to his manipulation. That was her moment. Before she could lose her nerve, Christina pushed back her chair. The sound echoed in the room, sharp and unexpected. Heads turned. Richard paused, startled mid-sentence. "Excuse me," Christina said, rising to her feet. Her voice was steady, clearer than she imagined it would. "I need to address something before this presentation goes any further." Gasps fluttered around the table. Richard's brow furrowed, his smirk wavering. "Christina," he said, his tone dripping with warning, "this isn't the time for your little details." She lifted her bag, pulling out the thick folder of documents. "On the contrary, Richard," she said, locking eyes with him, "this is exactly the time." The room fell into silence. Every shareholder leaned forward. For the first time, Christina wasn't invisible. She was the center of the room. The room was heavy with tension, every breath held captive by the weight of Richard's presentation. He stood confidently at the podium, flashing doctored graphs and inflated numbers across the screen. His voice carried that smug tone everyone had grown accustomed to, the same arrogance that had belittled Christina countless times. "And that," Richard declared proudly, "is why our future looks brighter than ever. Vision, leadership, and bold decisions have brought us here." He smirked, adding with a quick glance at Christina, "Of course, some people don't see the bigger picture." A few chuckles scattered around the table, but Christina didn't flinch. She rose slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The sound sliced through the air like a blade. All eyes turned toward her, surprise flashing in their expressions. Christina never interrupted. "Actually," she said, her voice calm but unwavering, "there's something the board needs to see before we move forward." Richard's smirk widened. "Oh, do enlighten us." "Another one of your little details," he mocked. Christina didn't respond to the jab. Instead, she reached into her bag and withdrew a thick folder, neatly bound and tabbed. She laid it on the table, sliding copies toward the nearest board members. "These are the real numbers," she explained. "The unedited financials, contracts, and communications tied directly to Richard's accounts." The room hushed. The shuffle of papers filled the silence as the shareholders leaned forward, scanning through the document. Richard chuckled nervously, waving a dismissive hand. "This is absurd. She's overreaching. Misinterpreting data she doesn't even." But then a murmur rippled across the table. One board member's brows furrowed. Another whispered something under their breath. And another gasped, eyes darting back and forth between Christina and Richard. Christina steadied her breathing and continued, her words sharp but steady. "For months, I poured my time into preparing the product launch, ensuring everything would succeed. And while I was doing that, Richard here was busy moving company funds into shell accounts, while taking credit for work he didn't even touch. The same work he mocked me for doing." Her voice grew stronger with each sentence, the emotion she'd held back for so long finally finding relief. "He publicly humiliated me at the launch. Laughed at me. But what he didn't expect was that I'd been keeping receipts the entire time." Richard's smirk was gone. His face paled as the board members flipped faster through the evidence. "This is ridiculous," he barked, but his voice cracked. "Is it?" Christina countered, locking eyes with him. "Because the numbers don't lie. And neither do the transfers to your personal accounts." The room erupted with questions, sharp, angry demands fired at Richard. "Explain this. Is this true? How long has this been happening?" His once commanding presence crumbled under the weight of scrutiny. Richard's hands shook, his confident mask shattered. For the first time, Christina stood taller than him, and everyone could see it. Richard's downfall didn't happen with fireworks or shouting, it happened in silence. The silence of a room full of powerful shareholders, all staring at him as the weight of Christina's evidence landed like a hammer. His face drained of color, his usual arrogance nowhere to be found. For once, Richard couldn't laugh, couldn't mock, couldn't twist the narrative in his favor. The numbers, the signatures, the bank transfers, all meticulously documented by Christina, spoke louder than any excuse he could ever come up with. The board chair cleared his throat, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Richard, these findings are undeniable. Not only have you manipulated the launch results, but you've siphoned funds from the very company that trusted you. Effective immediately, you are stripped of your position and barred from all future dealings with this corporation." Richard opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to curse, but no words came. His empire of deceit had collapsed in front of everyone. He glanced toward Christina, hoping maybe to see fear or hesitation or even pity in her eyes. But she gave him nothing. Just calm, just quiet certainty. And then the tide turned. The same executives who once ignored Christina's contributions now turned to her with newfound respect. One of the senior shareholders leaned forward, his tone gentler than, "Christina, you've proven not only loyalty but vision and resilience. You carried this product launch on your shoulders despite sabotage from within. We'd like to offer you leadership over the division you built." Her heart swelled, not from ego, but from vindication. The very stage Richard had used to humiliate her had become the platform of her victory. She accepted with grace, her voice steady, though inside she was trembling, not from nerves but from release. Years of swallowing words, of letting herself be silenced, had ended in this one moment of truth. As Richard was escorted out, muttering under his breath, Christina sat straighter than ever before. This wasn't just revenge. It wasn't about humiliating him the way he had humiliated. It was about reclaiming what he tried to take, her dignity, her work, her rightful place. In the closing minutes of the meeting, she looked around at the faces still buzzing with the shock of what had unfolded. She thought of all the times she had convinced herself that silence was safer, that speaking up would ruin her. But now she knew the truth. Silence had been the real prison. And her voice, steady, unshaken, had been the key to freedom. When the meeting adjourned, Christina didn't storm out in triumph. She didn't gloat, didn't linger in victory. She simply walked out, head high, a faint smile on her lips. Not angry, not bitter, just free. Her revenge wasn't in destroying Richard. It was in proving, to him and to herself, that she had always been stronger than his cruelty. Do you think Christina made the right choice by exposing Richard in front of everyone, or should she have handled it privately? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this keep you hooked, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one.